Clarence Thomas never misses an opportunity to disappoint me.
Because what you mean? Clarence Thomas here, the ultra-conservative, black, white supremacist Supreme Court justice, voted against affirmative action and the Civil Rights Act while benefiting from both. Now, why is that important? Because now that he's helped dismantle the Civil Rights Act, Trump has said he's now retroactively going after those who hold degrees gained by affirmative action. So, two things to that. One, that case now has to go in front of the Supreme Court, in front of Clarence. So if he agrees to this, he is stripping himself of both his degree and his position on the bench. So I just can't wait to see how this plays out.
If Clarence Thomas has 0 haters, that means I've been run over and killed by a PT Cruiser. Because Clarence Thomas should have never been a Supreme Court justice. Had we listened to this black woman, he would have been in the back of a police car and not on the bench of the Supreme Court. In 1991, Thurgood Marshall retires from the Supreme Court. Big Bush says, hey, we need a black and a Republican to replace him. Who does he pick? Clarence Thomas. The Senate Judiciary Committee sent a subpoena to a black woman in Oklahoma named Anita Hill. But why? Well, in 1981, Clarence Thomas is working for the Department of Education. In 1982, Ronald Reagan gives him a job to chair the EEOC. In all 3 of these years, he had a black woman named Anita Hill working up under him. And in all 3 of these years, he sexually harassed this woman. Anita says that for 3 years, Clarence begged her to go on a date with him, would bring up his manhood in the workplace, would talk about his pubes and things of that nature, would talk about explicit films, all in the workplace during the 9 to 5. Anita came in to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee to tell her story. The only problem is the people she was testifying before were 14 white men, and they weren't trying to hear anything she had to say. Frankly, a lot of their line of questioning was disrespectful.
Committee, what was the most embarrassing of all the incidences that you have alleged? You testified this morning that the most embarrassing question involved, that's not too bad, women's large breasts. That's a word. Are you interested in writing a book? It is appropriate to ask Professor Hill anything any member wishes to ask her to plumb the depths of her credibility. You are not now drawing a conclusion that Judge Thomas sexually harassed you.
Yes, I am drawing that conclusion. That is
I understand.
Anita tells her story in excruciating detail. Clarence responds and calls this nothing but a high-tech lynching. And that was it. Clarence Thomas still becomes a Supreme Court justice. Anita Hill goes back to her life as a professor at Oklahoma State. She receives death threats, and nobody believes her. Clarence Thomas wouldn't speak about this, wouldn't even really deny the allegations until he spoke about it in his 2007 book, My Grandfather's Son, where he called Anita Hill his most traitorous adversary and said that she was mentally ill. Anita Hill is still alive, still a lawyer, still a professor of law, and I hope wherever she is, that she had a great day today.
I know that there's somebody out there that might disagree with what I'm about to say, and that's all right. Because I got something that's been sitting heavy in my chest, okay, for the last few days. And I'm going to go ahead on and say what I feel needs to be said, okay? There's a man sitting on the highest court in this land, the Supreme Court of the United States, and his name is Clarence Thomas. Now, I want you to hear me before you come for me in the comments, okay? Because this is not about his skin color. This is about what he has done with the power that the struggle of other people has put within his reach. Clarence Thomas got into Yale Law School through affirmative action. He said so. The very policy that opened the door for him, he spent decades on that court working to slam it shut for everybody else, okay? Now, I'm a historian, right? And I know what that looks like. I've seen that playbook before. There's an old saying, and it is old. It's rooted in wisdom, and it's earned the hard way. This old saying says, all skin folk ain't kin folk, okay? Zora Neale Hurston, she knew it. Thurgood Marshall, he knew it. When Thomas was nominated to replace Marshall, Marshall made it plain. A black face in a high place doesn't automatically mean your interests are being represented. Got it? Representation without advocacy is just decoration, isn't it? And here's what makes it sting differently than plain old political disagreement. Clarence Thomas didn't just benefit from the struggle, he used it. He climbed the ladder that black sacrifice, black blood, black legal brilliance built, and then he turned around and kicked that ladder down. Dare anybody else to try to climb it. That's not a philosophical difference. As far as I'm concerned, that's a betrayal. And his wife, Jenny, she was neck deep in the events of January the 6th, and he has refused to recuse himself from cases connected to it. The ethics questions alone should have everybody around here alarmed about that. But here's what I need you to sit with today. The presence of a black face can be used to, let's say, legitimize harm. Sometimes more powerfully than if a white face had done the same thing. Why? Because it provides cover. It confuses people. It makes them question what they know to be true. Now, don't be confused, family. You can love your people and hold your people accountable. Those are not opposites. All skin folk ain't kin folk. And as a historian, I always follow the record, not the optics.
So Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was speaking, and he started talking about or sharing his thoughts on progressivism, saying that progressivism is actually a threat to our union, that it's becoming a bit much, that he's a little bit concerned about it, that it is antithetical to our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. And in the comments, there were so many people repeating the same thing, and that is, if it were not for progressivism, he wouldn't be here. So essentially what they're saying and how they're interpreting this is, well, progressivism is about change and progress. And so why is he against it when he's a black man, and without it, he would not be allowed to be a Supreme Court justice? Then it dawned on me, a lot of people do not understand the difference between progressivism and conservatism as it relates to the Constitution. When you are talking about the Constitution, there are two different things at play, and it's important to know the difference. His concern is that the Constitution is being interpreted too loosely and that the government is gaining too much power over time. This is a legitimate concern. For all the people, all my life, I've been hearing people say, we don't trust the government. We don't want the government in our business. We don't want them encroaching on our lives, etc., etc. Okay, so yes, there has to be a mechanism to restrain politicians from obtaining too much power. The concern is that politicians are finding ways to backdoor the Constitution and change the laws to fit their agenda and not keep or conserve the Constitution for in its original intent. Progressivism is the idea that society should evolve, that government should provide economic relief and social services, or that laws and the Constitution should be interpreted in a more modern context. Conservatism in the constitutional sense is the belief that the Constitution should be interpreted in its original intent, that you should scale back, be more cautious with government expansion, that you should not allow government to obtain so much power, that government power should essentially be limited. The mix-up is that people believe progressivism means change and that conservatism means no change or resistance. Their interpretation is, oh, you think of civil rights, well, that's progress, so yes, I'm progressive. That's how that is interpreted. No, we're talking about the law and the Constitution. So he's talking about his concerns with government overreach. Progressivism is about adaptation or reform or expanding government's role. Conservatism is preservation or limits, essentially constitutional restraint. One is, yes, let's have more government, and the other one is, no, wait a minute, maybe that's not a good idea. We need to reassess this. You need a balance, but when you're being too progressive, okay, now we have an issue. Just the same if you're too conservative and you don't have balance, that's equally an issue. These two are about speed of change, the role of government, and how the Constitution is interpreted.
Hello my good people, welcome to this amazing channel. So in today's video, we are going to talk about Clarence Thomas once more. You know, he's trending again, and Black Americans are furious about Clarence Thomas once more. Do you know what's happening? Guys, lately, even not lately, it has been there since so many years, a couple of years back. Clarence Thomas has always been kind of disagreeing with what black Americans are talking about in terms of their welfare in the United States, their well-being, like their rights, okay, their cultural, their history. He has been trying to kind of side with what white people want more than what black people want. And he is black. Now, that thing has always been an issue to the black Americans. They are saying Clarence Thomas is not representing them the way he's supposed to be. Like he's being favoring the other side. But guys, remember one thing. Clarence Thomas, most of the time, he has been the one in the front line to make some rulings that black Americans are always feeling kind of really disappointed with him and how he does conduct his ruling. So, in these recent days, he has been targeted by black Americans. They have talked about him and they are saying they feel he is not representing them well. Guys, I want to play a couple of videos here so that you guys can see what's really happening in United States of America. Guys, these videos that I'm going to play, remember guys, they are for educational entertainment purposes, and credits to the original creators of these videos that you're going to see. Guys, I would like to know what you think about this particular video in the comment section below, and let's start the video. I'll be back with more commentaries later on.
You ever meet a black man that's so anti-black you just feel like it's a setup? That's Clarence Thomas, the longest-serving judge on the Supreme Court, and the one most committed to rolling back the very rights that allowed him to rise. And his wife? That's the kind of white woman that's every black woman's worst nightmare. But we'll get to her. So let's start at the beginning. Clarence Thomas was born in 1948 in Pinpoint, Georgia, dirt poor and Jim Crow raised. He grew up speaking Gullah, was raised Catholic, went to seminary, and almost became a priest. But racism followed him everywhere until he flipped. And I don't mean flipped the system. I mean flipped on us. By the time he reached Yale Law School, he started to resent affirmative action. Not the racism that made it necessary, but the fact that white folks assumed he didn't belong. Instead of challenging them, he decided to join them. And in the 1980s, he got cozy with the conservatives. Reagan appointed him to the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. But instead of protecting black workers, this man gutted the very civil rights regulations that he was hired to enforce.
Listen up, family. Let me say this with my whole chest. Clarence Thomas is one of the biggest disappointments in modern American history. And no, I'm not saying that because he's black or I think that he should think a certain way. I'm saying it because he knows. He knows what this country was. He knows what segregation felt like. He knows what poverty looked like. He knows what it's meant to be born in the Jim Crow South in Pinpoint, Georgia, where opportunities was not handed to black children on a silver platter. He knows what it's meant for people before him to march, to bleed, get beaten, lose jobs, lose homes, and lose their lives so that somebody like him can even sit on the highest court of the land. And that is what makes this so painful. Because Clarence Thomas did not climb through an open door. Oh no. That door was kicked open by the civil rights movement. That door was held open by black mothers, black fathers, black students, black veterans, black organizers, and black church people who said, we are not asking America for permission to be human. And what did Clarence Thomas do when he got inside? He closed the door. No, let me correct that. He closed the door, locked it, bolted it, put a chair against it, and then acted like no one else was ever standing outside. That is not strength. That is not independence. That is not, I made it on my own. That is historical amnesia dressed up in a black robe. How do you benefit from the sacrifice of a movement, then turn around and help weaken the very protection that was fought for you? How do you sit in a seat made possible by civil rights struggle and then support decisions that make it harder to protect voting rights, harder to defend racial equality, harder for the institution to even acknowledge the weight of the country's history? And please don't tell me, well, he just following the Constitution. Because the Constitution had to be forced to recognize us. The Constitution had to be amended. The courts had to challenge. The streets had to be filled. The bridges had to be crossed. The dogs and the horses had to be faced. The ballot had to be protected because America did not wake up one morning and decide to be fair. People fought for that fairness. People died for that fairness. And Justice Thomas knows that. That's why this is so disappointing. That's why it cuts so deep. Because this is not just about politics. It's about memory. It's about responsibility. This is about what you owe the people whose back became the bridge for you to walk over. You don't have to agree with every policy. You don't have to support every program. You don't have to be a carbon copy for anybody's politics. But when you are a black man in America who rose from poverty and segregation to the Supreme Court, you should understand better than most that colorblind language does not erase color conscious damage. You cannot pretend racism is over just because you personally survived it. You cannot take your individual success story and use it as a weapon against everybody still trying to climb, because that is what hurts. It feels like he looked back at the community and shrugged his shoulders, saw the struggle still happening and said, well, I made it. Good luck. No, sir. That is not legacy. That's abandonment. The civil rights movement was not just about one black man getting a powerful title. It was about making sure the next child, the next family, the next voter, the next student, the next generation had a fair shot too. So yes, I'm disappointed in Clarence Thomas. Disappointed as a black man, a black American, disappointed as an American, disappointed as someone who understands that power without compassion is dangerous. Disappointed because he had the chance to be a guardian of justice, and too often he has chosen to be a gatekeeper against the very people history who should have taught him to protect. And Justice Thomas needs to understand something clearly. When you help dismantle protections built from black pain, people are going to remember. When you weaken rights paid for in blood, people are going to speak. When you climb up because of others' sacrifice, then turn around and lock the door behind you, people are going to call it what it is: a betrayal. Not just to a community, a betrayal of the struggle that made his rise possible. Now, that's my opinion.
In a 6-3 decision today, the Supreme Court voted to dismantle the Voting Rights Act. 6 conservative justices, including Clarence Thomas, voted to disenfranchise millions of black voters, voters of color all across America. And all of them should be held accountable, don't get me wrong here. But specifically Clarence Thomas, being only one of 2 black justices, the only black man on the court, votes to dismantle the voting rights of his own community? The same community that worked for decades to uplift black voters and black voices in our government votes to then go undermine all of that work. That's despicable. Am I surprised? No. Am I disappointed? Always. But this issue just really blows my mind. The cognitive dissonance he can have sitting on the highest court of the land, never has to worry about getting elected, makes a decision that makes it so much more difficult for black voices to be amplified in our government. Shame on you, Clarence Thomas. Shame on you.
The Supreme Court shocker, and this one actually shocked me considering this is a conservative Supreme Court. Clarence Thomas, he shocked me too. This particular Supreme Court has been really kind to conservatives and particularly to President Donald Trump. In fact, some of the liberal justices have spoken out about how much they dislike the emergency rulings and the verdicts that, or decisions or rulings, however you want to word it, that appear to keep coming in the favor of President Donald Trump and conservatives. But yesterday, there was an odd verdict out of the court, and basically the state of Florida had sued California and other liberal states about issuing driver's licenses to people who don't speak English. If they can't speak English, chances are they can't read the road signs. And so the court declined to take the case. And in a usually when the court declines to take a case, there's no wording or anything. But in a very unusual screed, Justice Clarence Thomas issued a stinging dissent on not taking the case, and Justice Alito joined him, saying, we should take this case. If we don't take this case where a state sues another state, who takes the case? This literally is only our jurisdiction, and Florida has no other regress. They have no other choice, no other place they can go but to the Supreme Court with this case. The other justices, and obviously including enough conservatives, did not see it that way.
But you're going to burn in hot, fiery hell. You will burn in hot, fiery hell for that, because what you're doing is disenfranchising people of your same hue, sir. What is the justification for that? The Constitution should never be something that is interpreted word for word without the idea that black people would one day be liberated. Now, Clarence Thomas is what they call, from constitutional law scholars, a strict constructionist. That means he wants it to be interpreted word for word, letter for letter. Whatever the framers meant, whatever they wrote, he wants to interpret it in that very strict way. The problem is, Clarence's ass wouldn't have been on the bench. He would not have been on the bench.
Okay, so Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas swats at Brown v. Board of Education in racial redistricting ruling. I am going to be talking about Clarence Thomas, but not for the reasons that you think. So Clarence has long had his eyes on Brown v. Board of Education as an extreme conservative on the Supreme Court. He believes that the ruling was wrong and it was a judicial overreach. Now, you would find this to be very confusing given the history of Clarence Thomas and that he is a black man. He, in fact, was a beneficiary of affirmative action. There was a very good Slate podcast that I invite all of you to go and listen to from Slow Burn, Becoming Justice Thomas. And it goes through his entire history from him growing up in South Carolina. He's actually Gullah Geechee and has a rich history there. However, he was raised by his grandparents, specifically his grandfather, who was very, very strict. He had a deep religious background, and he was picked on mercilessly by other black people for how dark he was and for his Gullah Geechee speech. You might find it surprising that he was also very much into the Black Power movement in college. But when he saw that the Black Power movement resulted in attacks and arrests, he gave it up. And then you see a very marked flip. Now, he's still conservative, and those who know that, the pull yourself up by your bootstraps, take care of yourself, maybe even separatist philosophies of the Black Power movement, and some people who are Black nationalists know that they have a lot in common with people who are politically conservative on the right, with the caveat being that they don't want anything to be based on race. Clarence here felt that he was not getting the opportunities that his friends were getting after he graduated from his Ivy League college because he was seen as an affirmative action hire, not because he was Black. So he then focused all of his attention on removing all of those affirmative action programs so that he himself could benefit from all of this education and all of this hard work. It's a misplaced anger. He feels himself to be incidentally Black. And I am one of those people who find it like, if my child grew up and got into some trouble and became a felon, it would be less embarrassing than my child growing up to denounce everything that they've ever grown up with and becoming Clarence Thomas. To my people out here, I say, make sure that you are affirming your child's Blackness. At that private school, at the tennis club, make sure you are checking the other Black family members and making sure that it's not funny when someone picks on another kid's hair or the color of their skin or how big their lips are or how wide their nose is. Not only will they learn to hate themselves, they will learn to hate you too.
Now that you guys have just heard everything from the beginning of how these people are furious about it, okay, about Clarence Thomas, I would like to ask you one question, guys. What do you think Clarence Thomas, like he was a Black American, do you think Clarence Thomas is doing the rightful way, the way he's supposed to do? I'd like to know your opinions about these guys. Remember, keep it because I want this to be kind of a conversation, guys, okay? And I would like to know what you guys think about Clarence Thomas and how things are going. Like, do you think what he's doing is okay? Or do you think he need to change some things? Or do you think we need another, maybe supreme leader at that particular point? Let me know what you think about this particular video, because I know many black people are furious, very furious about with Clarence Thomas on how he has been behaving of late concerning the matters Black Americans, okay? And you have just heard many people are saying it's not because of Black that we are furious, no, but we want him to represent fairly, okay? Like, he's supposed to be just, okay? Not just to look like favoring one side or the other. That's how Black Americans are thinking, but at this particular moment. Let me know, guys, what you think about this video. And remember, guys, if you're watching this video and you haven't subscribed yet, kindly do me a favor of subscribing to this amazing channel and give it a like. And also, guys, let me know what you think about this particular video, how you guys think things should be on this other side. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Up to this point, I just want to say thank you so much. Stay safe, peace, one love, guys, and stay tuned. I'll see you in the next one, which is coming very, very soon. Another video. Bye bye. Ciao, one love, peace.